The following is a presentation of the ForceCenter podcast feed.
From the center of that galaxy and direct from our galaxy, this is ForceCenter presents OtherCenter. I'm Ken Napzok. When you say it slow, it works out.
I'm Joseph Scrimshaw. I said it slowly to make sure I get it right.
And I'm Jennifer Landa.
Thanks for listening to us today. Thanks for joining the OtherCenter adventure. Quick update if you're checking in to see, hey, where's the space saga stuff? We are involved and supporting the strikes. And that is why we're talking about other parts of life, the universe, and everything. And it's something that we'll probably carry forward, too, once we're able to talk about the saga we love. Thanks for listening. We got Cues of the Other today, Joseph, and we're excited. We got some deep ones here. This is going to be interesting. Before we get to all that, though, I don't want to forget, we want to remind you today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ForceCenter. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Little ForceCenter recommends. We talked about California on the main deep dive this week. We recommend that you try out The Yosemite by John Muir. It's on Audible. Download your free audiobook today by going to audibletrial.com/ForceCenter. Again, that's audibletrial.com/ForceCenter for your free audio book. Joseph, we got questions for us, but I ask for everyone out there.
That is right. We want to thank everyone for the emotional support on OtherCenter and also supporting us on Patreon. If you have it in you, we could use some support on YouTube. If you're not subscribed, it would be great to get some new subscriptions or some recommendations. If you think anybody might enjoy our podcast on YouTube, you could ask them to give us a follow. We would love to get back up to 8,000 subscribers. And when I say back up, we've never been to 8,000 subscribers. So we'd like to get back to where we were and then keep climbing all the way to the stars, also known as 8,000 subscribers.
Love that. Well done. And we're going to get there. We are going to get there indeed. We got some good questions, Joseph. Let's dive right in. It's going to be going to go a lot of places today.
Yeah. We have so many great questions of the other. This was always something that we did when we were busy talking about the Galactic Saga, and people would put forward their questions, and some real life stuff would creep in here. But once we started doing OtherCenter, just put out the call on our Patreon. If you're a patron or you want to join us on Patreon, scroll down. You will see the post. That's a picture of Ken looking at fish, breaded fish in London. Invitation to ask us just about anything. We have such a wide variety of questions and a lot more still to get to. This episode might be the widest in a topic seriousness level. So we got some fun ones, but we start with a timely one and a kind of heavier one. This came in too late to do last week because we were doing our desserts episode, but I wanted to bring it in close to the incident that was being talked about. This comes to us from Josh Vaskovich. Josh says, hello, Jen, Ken, and Joseph. Been a long-time listener. Absolutely love your approach to the show and the perspectives you give, but finally became a patron. I'm especially loving these OtherCenter episodes. The Favorite Bands Artist episode was so much fun. Ken, I will be seeing you two in Vegas for my birthday next month, says Josh. But since we are approaching the anniversary of 9/11, I wanted to hear your experiences of that day, the effect it had on you as individuals, and your perspective on the aftermath. For myself, says Josh, I was 14, freshman year, first year of football, so it was a time of great change. I knew the world I once knew would never be the same. Although it was a day of great loss and death, I still look for the stories of heroism and compassion and humanity. I know it's a heavy topic, but I feel this is a safe space to discuss. Josh, this is a great question, and thank you for the kind compliments about how the OtherCenter episode is going. I hope you enjoy you two in Vegas, and really wanted to tackle this. Ken, any thoughts on you two in Vegas before we get into the heavier question?
This is a gear shift on the freeway. That is, I was like, oh, that's great. Oh, wait, that's right. This question's a serious one. Yeah, Josh, enjoy that. I had a chance to see him. I had a chance to maybe go see them with a friend of ours, Darina. Ariano invited me and some friends out, and I just couldn't make it. And I'm bummed. It's still one of my all-time favorite bands I've never seen live. So enjoy that show. Larry Mullen Jr., drumming or not, it's going to be a good one.
And Jennifer, have you ever seen U2 in Las Vegas?
No, I haven't, but I bet it'd be a great show.
I'm sure it would. All right. So we will get into this heavier question. But as Josh says, sometimes even the heaviest questions have glimmers of hope in humanity and heroism. And I do not know the answers to these questions for either you or Ken, Jennifer. So where were you on 9/11 and what kind of impact did you feel in the world from that eventful day?
I believe, and I'm not 100% sure, I'd have to look back on things, but I believe I was working at E! Entertainment, and I was getting ready for work, and my friend / roommate, she would always have like the morning shows on, and she was like, you have to come see this. You have to come see this. And I just remember staring at the TV, and they were talking that it was, a terrorist attack, and it just did not feel real.
Mm-hmm.
I really was in disbelief. My producer called me and she's like, don't come into work. And then this fear washed over us of like, are we safe here? Is it going to happen in Los Angeles? Because it's such a, big city. And it was interesting because I called my dad, because my dad, the news, and he's seen it all. And he just it's not that he expected it, but he had no problem like accepting it because, of his generation, they went through so much with the MLK assassination, JFK assassination, Vietnam. So many atrocities happened during his generation. This really felt like such a big moment for our generation.
Mm-hmm.
And it completely changed everything. I was also working at Disneyland during that time. I would work on the weekends, and I was Princess Jasmine. And it was so strange. Right after this had happened, it must have been like a week or two after, I was walking across Main Street with my Aladdin, in our costumes. And these two kids were like, terrorists, like shouting at us.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I have never felt like that. I was like, whoa, oh my, I got scared, and we like ran across backstage. And it made me I'm like, I'm not Middle Eastern, but I could not imagine what the prejudice and racism that so many Middle Eastern people in our country experienced during that time and since. I mean, and I remember I also would wear this cloak as Jasmine that kind of resembled, I think it's called chador, which is what Muslim women will wear. I didn't want to wear it. I was scared, and it was a really weird time. I remember our lines were shorter. This is a fictional character, but the sentiment in the country had totally changed. And oh my gosh, it just, what an experience. What an experience.
Wow. That is so visceral, to hear that specific experience. There's discussion, it feels like to me, every year on social media where one or two people will post something kind of tone deaf about how it brought the country together. And I feel the experience that I had is that maybe the day of, it was one of those, everybody stop and everybody pay attention. We're all in this place together. But then, yes, immediately after the actual event, it was not about unity. It was about these kinds of terrible things. Jennifer, how did you feel on the actual day? Like, what did you do? Where did you, since you didn't go into E, did you just sit glued to the television?
Yes, I did. We just watched the news and trying to make sense of it, trying to understand how this happened. If it, like I said, if it would happen here. And I think from that moment on, that's when I actually got my fear of flying, because I had never been afraid to fly. But after, we started learning more about it, ever since then, like I have panic attacks on flights. Like I can't, I'm sure it must come from that and that fear that I felt that day. And then the videos that we saw were just horrific, not just of the planes, but the people on the ground and oh my gosh, it just, when I saw this question, I was like, oh gosh, I couldn't even look back. I was like going to Google it. I couldn't even look back on the news reports. It really was so traumatic. I cannot even imagine being in New York, or knowing someone at that, experienced that.
Yeah. I love what you said too about your father having a different perspective, from a generational perspective. And I remember talking with other friends about that by the time we were getting that age, my various friends are, ranging from young 20s to just turning 30 in Gen X, and other generations had been defined by massive conflicts like World War II and Vietnam. And Gen X had yet to be defined by a crisis. Like, yes, there was the first Iraq War, but the people I knew were mostly too young to be, even afraid of a draft. And this felt like this generational shifting event. So I think the generational perspective is really interesting. I'm also interested if your father had a different perspective, as a journalist, is somebody who covers, hold cold, hard truths. And also, as we talked about last episode, being a child of immigrants, I think there's a lot of this kind of stuff happens other places. This doesn't happen in America. Do you think your dad had a better perspective, a more international perspective?
Yeah, I'm sure. And he's also very desensitized. I mean, he would be first on the scene where they would say, okay, there's a small plane crash in, where the valley or whatever. He'd drive out there. He would get there before he and other journalists would get there before paramedics. So he'd be seeing like dead bodies. He'd be seeing like horrific car accidents with fatalities. So he really became very desensitized to violence firsthand. So I think that it was just kind of like, he really actually helped me like process it, and he's like, yeah, it could happen in Los Angeles. He's like, but most likely, he was like trying to explain to me where it might happen or things like that. And so, yeah, he's the person I go to in a crisis because he's always very, very calm.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. Ken, where were you on that day?
I will try not to be the old white uncle at the party that talks for hours about things like this.
Well, we'll be in competition for that honor, so don't worry. Take your time.
Briefly, I was. God, you said it right, about 24, 25, right? But I was working graveyards, and it's important to know because it was my day off, Monday into Tuesday, and I had would stay up late, so I'd go to bed at 6 a.m. even my days off, and I was just getting ready to go. I'd been maybe writing on a computer, so I wasn't plugged in. There was the days where you had Twitter just going and your news updates and that thing. So I went to bed and was maybe asleep about 5 minutes when I heard my roommate down the hall going, a plane hit it, all those kind of things. And I remember, and I heard plane hit World Trade Center. And I did what a lot of people talk about. I went, hey, probably some Cessna hit it. And I'm sure I'll get an update when I wake up. So I drifted off. And about 10 minutes later, he starts pounding on my door. He goes, hey, I think you need to get out here. And so got out and we sat and glued and watched and that fear of what could have happened to here. And I always talk about how me and my roommates, we're all different. I actually just had lunch with both of them recently, and some of the darkest, most gallows humor stuff came out of our mouths because that's all we could do. It's all we could process it. And I'm not saying bad things that were towards kind of stuff you're talking about, Jen, but just like, oh my God, what if it does come here? It's just like, because we couldn't understand it. And you're so right about the generational thing and, the Challenger thing. I remembered Reagan being the assassination attempt. I remember it felt foggy. Nothing to this level. And that's all we could do. And I had a similar experience, a few years into my security career, and certainly not as jaded, but my boss at the time, I not to get into the details, the Hollywood Highland Mall had not opened up yet. And I had an interview. So this is Tuesday. I had an interview on Friday for a supervisor position at the Hollywood Highland Security Department. And about 11 a.m., my phone rings, and it's my boss at work who was recently retired from the LAPD SWAT team. And he goes, hey, it's Joe. And I'm like, hey, yeah. And he goes, hey, so I just want to remind you about your interview on Friday. You need prep. And I literally go, Joe, are you watching the news? And I go, do I saw my interview? And he goes, yeah. No, it's really bad. Anyways, hey, your interview, and it's just like talking about what your dad talked about. Your dad,
wow.
This was a drop in the hat, right? They understood the importance of it. They had shut down the mall, but he's like, yeah, not good. Anyways, we need to keep going on working, and so there's that. I remember that, and you're watching all day. I had my first gallbladder attack that night because we sat there watching the news. My stress level's probably up, and I ate a bunch of pizza with my roommates, and I was in the hospital by the next morning. And it's just all these weird memories around that. And then the weeks and days after, you talk about, we'll talk more about, love to hear your experience on the day, Joseph, and talk about some of the stuff after. There was that false, I think you're right to say it's a false sense of coming together. Because about 5 days later, I drove up to my hometown, and all along the 101 freeway, and every overpass was a flag, a heart, a this and a that. And I remember crying, and you had that sense of we're going to get, we are America. And that was part of the danger. You just feeling the supposed kinship, and all the experiences you're having, Jen, which started immediately, aren't there. But then still working graveyards for a couple more months, planes, even that week, specifically that week, the planes, I can't remember when the planes started to go back normal, passenger planes, but sitting outside of an empty Los Angeles at 2 or 3 in the morning with clouds overhead, and all you heard were military jets on patrol. Is sounds and memories I will never forget. Because you couldn't see them. It wasn't a clear night. And my friend and I were looking up, and you just heard this as they just did patrols around LA. And that's part of the memory of just that whole thing, which led to, and I'll kick it back to you, Justin, but just led to me. I joke. I just did a podcast about this on my Blathering channel, my own channel. Check it out. I say this with a little bit of a joke, but I know I'm not alone. I am one of those 9/11 folks where Jen, you talk about it, you don't watch a lot of news, you can't watch it. I will watch the news broadcasts from start to finish. I will watch every doc about it. And describe it as a morbid fascination. There's also, I was a first responder type for a while, and I'm not joking. I used to drive to work every day when I was a director, picking a scenario, going, is today there's a shooting? Is today a bomb? What would I do if that happens? So I'm morbidly fascinated with that kind of aspect of it, but there's a greater history of it too that needs to be discussed. So anyways, that was day.
No, absolutely. I want to talk more about Fallout. And I also want to ask you, so you were already working security. It was already your profession. Do you feel like you had a different reaction to it in terms of thinking about, did you very quickly think about how it could have and should have been stopped? Did you have a security perspective?
No, but you had a sense of, again, what do you do? And the fun aspect of it, that if you choose that kind of life, is don't let any in those emergency businesses lie. We love running in while everyone's running out. That's why you do those jobs. And you can make fun of I worked in the public safety retail security business. You think I'm arresting shoplifters at Claire's. I'm not. I was a leader on something called Operation Dark Cloud. I was one of the security supervisors, which was a multi-agency training session on terrorist, dirty bomb chemical attacks. Like, that's the kind of stuff I dealt with more, because it's 20,000 people coming to a mall, and it's a small city, and it is a danger, especially that malls are a little less vibrant these days. And then when I was at the Grover Farmers Market, we were on terror watch list. There was a guy we caught taking videos of our cameras and all that kind of stuff. So, and this whole conversation is complicated, going to back what Jen's experiencing and going, but no, there was not an excitement. I don't want to make anyone convey that, but it was just like, all right, we got to discuss what we're doing. We got to discuss what we're doing as a city. Operation Dark Cloud happened in August of 2003. So it's giant. We're talking giant, 1,000 people involved, agencies from all, and the biggest thing we learned on that day is that we did it was a live training scenario of a chemical bomb exploding in a mall. One of the things we learned is that none of these agencies knew how to work together. None of these agencies knew how to talk to each other, and everyone like a game. And you'd sit there, and you'd have a police officer a lieutenant come up to me and go, "Hey, so what?" But we go, "Hey, this is what happened." And he'd walk away, and then the fire captain would come and be like, "What happened? He'd ask the same questions the police lieutenant asked, but they wouldn't talk to each other. They wouldn't talk to. So all that from that day, that's what changed in my world around that. It went from organized retail crime, which is this and that, to this kind of stuff does happen, and there is a desensitizing that comes from that experience, and maybe something like my boss. I'm not saying it in a good way or a bad way. Bad thing. Part of that's. It's a Tuesday. Welcome to Tuesday. Anyways, your job interview's on Friday. Couple of my bosses were in the North Hollywood shootout from as SWAT members. If you ever watch that video, it's a harrowing thing. one of my bosses was the one who drove the car down to the guy that they shot out his ankles. He's the guy in the car. So being around those guys, it is horrible. They understand it's horrible. They just how do you act in that? That's the trick. So it was a weird. It changed a lot. And then I had the thought of, well, should I stop pursuing comedy? Should I join up? I had friends who joined up. They joined the military because of that incident. They left. Should I do this? Should I work harder in pursuing a police and fire career? Which sometimes I wish I did. Sometimes I'm very glad I didn't. That was around my view, my perspective of the world at that time.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, I think in my opinion, there's been a lot of paranoia and in my opinion, some security theater around it. But for you working at a mall, yeah, that's not a mall cop joke. The people who absolutely did and do have a problem with America wanted to attack the idea of capitalism. And a mall where with, complacent American capitalism, there's a very good reason that was not paranoia then to be concerned about that.
And again, I definitely want to hear your experiences. It leads to especially where I'm at now of studying the entire picture of the day and the decades before and the decades since.
After. Yeah, we'll get into that for sure, because I want to talk more about Fallout, because I think you probably had to literally adjust your life a lot to deal with it. Yeah, for me the day of is extremely vivid because I was working at Kinko's in downtown Minneapolis. I was the assistant manager at that point. The Kinko's in Minneapolis is in one of the tallest and most famous skyscrapers in downtown Minneapolis, the IDS Center, a beautiful shimmering blue building. I loved working there because that building to me was like, that's Minneapolis. My parents had playing cards of the IDS from when it was new. So I took a lot of pride in working at the IDS. But Kinko's was there. We had installed a television on the wall maybe a year earlier, because the lines were always long at Kinko's, and a lot of our business was business people. And so my manager at the time was like, we're going to put on CNN to distract them while they wait in line. So yeah, it's not social media. I did not listen to radio or anything. So I'm just like, well, I'm thinking about the sketch comedy I need to finish writing for my next show and drive into work. And I turned the corner to walk into Kinko's, and on that television is a picture of, the smoke coming out of the second tower. And the overnight manager, the third shift assistant manager that I'm taking over for, is like, a plane hit the towers, and like, oh wow, and like, but then a second one did, so I don't think it can be an accident. And it was like, I was kind of walking in at the moment that all the news was like, yep, this can't be an accident, it just happened again.
Right.
And so it was this weird tense, like, okay, I'm the assistant manager, I gotta keep working on all of moving everything forward. And I got a call from my dad. I got a call from my friend. I got a call from an ex-girlfriend saying, that's the skyscraper to hit in Minneapolis. Get out of there. And I was like, I'm the assistant manager. I have a responsibility. I can't just leave. But my dad was really like, and my dad's a super, like, you work hard, period. If your boss asks you to stay 2 hours late, you do it. And my dad was just like, just leave, son.
Wow.
And I was like, I can't. And Kinko's did not close then. It was 24/7, and different Kinko's in metro areas would rotate which holidays they closed on. So it was like arcane knowledge how to actually literally physically close, because most somebody's like, how is there a key? Does the door actually physically close? I don't know, much less computer systems, and where do we take all the jobs that we still have to finish? So the building, the IDS, decided we're going to close down. Because I called and like talked to the upper management, and like the upper management had said, we're thinking about it. We're analyzing the situation. You know, we're aware it's a situation to think about. And then the building was like, everybody get out. We're closing. The building's closing. So then I got the okay from like the boss's boss to try to close Kinko's, which I think it was only the second time I'd ever done that.
Crazy.
So I sent the other employees home, locked everything up. We had all these jobs in progress, and you know, we make jokes about Kinko's and Copy Shop, but at the time, it was a different time. We had like, you know, multi-$1,000 huge deal projects. So I had to pack everything up and physically drive it to another Kinko's. And the Kinko's I dropped it off at, I will never forget, was right next to a Toys R Us. And like, I was always just like, well, if I get physically close to a Toys R Us, I'm going to Toys R Us. To check on, you know, Power of the Force figures or whatever. And I dropped all of the Kinko, all the copies off, and just felt, you know, couldn't process it all. And I like stepped one foot into the Toys R Us, and I was like, what am I doing? This is wrong. And turned around and went home. And I had crappy dial-up internet. I didn't even have any sort of account. We were still on my girlfriend that I lived with ex-boyfriend's account, piggybacking on something to even get on Internet Explorer. But I, you know, checked with my couple friends in New York. You know, I talked to my brother on the phone and really processed we understand this happens other places in the world, and we're being very privileged. But from our perspective, this is fantasy level stuff. These, you know, especially in the 90s, 2000s, with the super kind of over the top versions of, you know, things like Mission Impossible and that, of like, this is what, you know, fantasy heroes stop. So that uncomfortable merging of what we had been looking at as fantasy, but it is not, it's real world. And now we're experiencing that. I remember processing that a lot. And then just sat there the rest of the day watching television. The other part of it is my girlfriend at the time wasn't home. She was on a vacation with her parents, but her father had worked for the government and recently retired. And he did go back to the government because of this. He's a very fascinating man, but he was really upset because he's like, I worked for years to stop things like this, and I wasn't there, and I didn't get a chance to be a part of stopping this. And I'm going back. So yeah, visceral, strange memories of the actual day, and then we get into much more of the fallout.
Wow.
Yeah. So for you, Ken, what when you talk about the fallout, when you talk about studying the history of everything, where does your mind go to what was changed?
Just I'll start here. You know, I'm a never forget person, but man, hasn't that phrase been taken and used in so many ways that need to be analyzed. And I've gone through a big sea change in my last couple of years, but it's a brewing thing where I think that day should be understood, and it should be understood for the pain that it is. I did not lose anyone directly. I got some friends who did lose some folks. I got some friends from New York who are still haunted of it. 22 years later, one of my friends, he goes, I just, every day, it's in my head. And he's been in therapy for it. So it's always important for me to understand the pain of that day. I even kind of get a little grumpy at some of, younger generation folks who I think are really cynical about it, because maybe you were 2, maybe you were 3, or maybe you weren't even alive. But you got a TikTok and a Twitter handle, and there's a lack of understanding. It's just like I had a lack of understanding of Pearl Harbor or anything else. But I also think it's important. History, this is what history does. You move on, time goes on, and then you get the full picture. You get the fallout. Like I said, I'm a never forget person, or maybe it's always remember. I've seen that sentiment out there as well. But you cannot deny that the term never forget has become a shield, and it's become a shield that people hold up to protect themselves from facing what's going on with them, which is an anger, a darkness, becoming maybe what we feared, and then not understanding how we got there. Not that we are responsible for it, or taking responsibility from those that perpetrated this horror. But understand the picture, which directly ties to Russia invading Afghanistan in 1979 and the Mujahideen and all those things, and how that breeds this and breeds that. And there's no right or wrong as to how I look at it. There's just this big picture to understand what it did to us. And there's docs, everyone knows, Ken loves his docs. I think you need to, if you can take it, and if it's not something you want to watch, then something that's the right answer for you. But the two French brothers, Jules and Gideon Naudet, who were the ones who were filming when the first plane hit, that's their doc. You can watch that one. We talk about ground level. They were the only ones inside. Remember, this is we got very few photos. If this had happened 5-6 years later, the amount of footage we've had that we probably wouldn't want to see from the inside would be too countless. I think you need to experience it, and I think you need to understand those that were there for the safety of it all and the emergency response of it all. But then you cannot stop, and I think that I used to always just stop on those docs. And there is the great it's called Turning Point, 9/11 and the War on Terror. It came out a couple years, I think, on 20th anniversary on Netflix. It's a 5-parter. I'm not saying any doc is ever perfect. Or that every doc doesn't cover, docs don't cover every aspect. But I recommend this one because it takes the time to go into the horror of that day with people who survived it, people who lost on that day. But it takes the time to analyze where we were and where we are. And it's sad, and it's depressing at times to see what we did on those days, and to pitch it back to you shortly, Jen, of just those stories existed from the moment it happened. The moment that first plane hit, what you were experiencing, Jen, was happening to people in our country, and we don't allow that. And then people in my old line of work, or my old friends who love it, there's always this, we run in when you run out, and they use that to hide the horrors of those industries, right? They don't want to face those truths. That's what I mean when it's a shield. And I want to find a way to take all that back for those who can study and understand the full picture, both the pain and the lessons that we still need to learn. They're still going on, and how it applies to the world and those stories. And I had some Patreon supporters of mine, and they listened to ForceCenter, Tamor and Abdul, who were in New York at the time. And they told me what they experienced in school. During that time, during that era, and not just talking that year, but like years after, and what their family went through. And we can't and understanding their plight does not take away from the plight of anyone who died or experienced loss on that day. We got to put it all in a big bucket and study it all so we all can get better.
Yeah, it is a real a quick sort of. I'm trying to use the right words. It almost feels like the always remember should be about the actual horror of the attack, and also the amount of American culture that handled it by perpetrating not anger or a need for accountability or justice for the actual perpetrators, but just attacked other Americans who had nothing to do with it. And other human beings who had nothing to do with it. And that should be a part of always remember the tragedy that day, that we did not, as a culture, rise to the challenge of being judicious about what is the event, who is actually responsible, what is actually needed, and instead lashed out cruelly at other people.
Yeah, I titled my episode of my podcast last week, "Looking for Someone to Punch," because I felt that kind of, we got hit hard, and to what you talked about too, of just like this. Yeah, this isn't something we experience on our shores. For other people, it's a daily part of their existence.
Yeah,
which was part of why they did that. I'm going to say that's not a hey, that's a good job on that. I mean, you know what I mean by that. Like, that was part of the horror of what. Here? No, this looks like Independence Day. What are you talking about? And we couldn't process that. But yeah, I'm with you. Just it immediately that get up, look for someone to punch. There's a certain space saga that has some lessons about that.
Yeah, Jen, how did you feel about the kind of ongoing fallout? Did some of those incidents that you're talking about at Disney, did those continue? Did they get better or worse as America got involved in wars in reaction?
Oh, I do think that it's still, I mean, it's gotten better obviously since then, but it was bad for a very, very long time. And I have some Middle Eastern friends who really suffered during that period. And even today, where a friend of mine, like the parts that he gets called in for as a Middle Eastern man is the terrorist, like on all these TV shows and in movies. And he's like, finally was like, to his agent, I do not want to do this. I don't want to do terrorist roles because I don't want to perpetuate that stereotype that people have that, since 9/11, quite frankly, for him. And so therefore he's not really auditioning because that's just the sad state of affairs.
All these years later,
it's shocking. And that's why sometimes 9/11, it feels, I'm really torn. Ken, you put it so well, to be remembering both all the people that were affected in many different ways, the aftermath, the day of, and things like that, because I feel like that's really when the far right, if we want to go down that road, kind of started to like bubble up more, and it became very much like America, the other, and these people are bad, and we need to make America strong again, blah, 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 blah. And this really toxic American attitude kind of, I feel like, at first it was great, like we're all banded together, and then it started to become, I feel, uglier, and something that I think we're still dealing with today.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
I'll be direct about it. I think you could trace from that Tuesday morning to January 6th and beyond. And I think the split starts to really ramp up there. I think the split also goes to Reagan era, goes to Goldwater, Republican. You could trace it, and it's not just to put it on one side, because there was an administration after Bush that made some mistakes over there in a lot of ways.
Right.
But it's part of it. It's part of our makeup. Joseph, your joke about American food being ego-sized sandwiches is genius on so many levels, as it is painfully true, right? And I get it. I felt guilty for not joining up. I'm pursuing comedy. My friends are joining the military. Adam Driver joined because of that.
Wow.
That was part of it, because that's the only thing to do. And the world we live in, there's a guy, rest in peace, named Pat Tillman, who was an NFL player at the height of his skills and power. I think he was around 27, Arizona Cardinals, very well-paid defensive player. And he quit to join the military. And he was killed in action in a friendly fire incident. And I'm not saying there's anything beyond that, because there's conspiracies you can follow. But this is a guy who got over there and went, we shouldn't be here. And this is wrong. And that started by 2002 and 2003. And that's part of that doc I highly recommend on Netflix, which traces some of that stuff, which ties to Vietnam. But anyways, one of the things, and I'll shut up, I swear, I keep reading this, I keep plugging this book, The Storm Is Here. Luke Mogelson, a war reporter who spent time in Syria, in Iraq, and all of the Middle East, covering our actions over there in the war in Afghanistan, the war on terror, saw stuff going on in Michigan with protests to the lockdowns and the masks and the vaccines, and vaccines weren't out yet, and said, I'm seeing the same thing there as I'm seeing here from us. And I'm going to go back and cover it, because something's not right. And you trace all that, and you trace this sense of the war. The 20-year war didn't affect us like it did Vietnam. The draft found the suburbs in Vietnam. The war came. We felt it, whether you wanted to or not, right? We didn't have that as much. Thank God. I'm glad we weren't drafted, but I know a lot of friends in the military. So it was distant. What was going on over there in the aftermath of 9/11, it's distant. There's a Grand Canyon between us and what's actually going on. We were allowed that luxury. And so once the idealism, the ideology and the connection and the sense of a lack of belonging and a lack of purpose started to coalesce in a lot of the political stuff around that time. And it's shockingly similar to what's emerged by Tuesday night or Wednesday evening of 2001. I believe in my heart it's all connected.
Yeah. I think a lot about, I don't know how much it is going to last in cultural memory, or if it's going to be more of a uniquely generational memory. I think of a lot of what you're talking about, Ken, is freedom fries. of the in my opinion there wasn't leadership that was, we need to respond laser like to this attack, and we need to respond honestly and fairly with what are the conflicts that led to this. It's a war on an ambiguous word that will justify lots of things, and I won't get into all that. But then when France didn't, bend the knee to what America demanded, the hubris of coming out and saying we're renaming it, we're not calling them French fries, we're calling them freedom fries.
Oh my gosh.
It's absurd, us against them. It's that this same kind of, that has not even any connection to history. Like fair enough, you just say like we're going to take the Statue of Liberty down, that would have been awful, but like it's so it is so incredibly dangerous and so incredibly laughably stupid at the same time that in freedom fries I see all of Donald Trump.
Right.
That
exactly.
It is incredibly dangerous and laughably stupid at the exact same time, which makes it kind of hard to wrestle with. Which the more research you do, that's the truth of authoritarianism, of jingoism, of my way or the highway. Hitler was laughable too, until he suddenly wasn't.
Right.
And I think a lot of it is like, we need to remember freedom fries and the stupidity of that, and all that sort of symbolizes the justification of. And everybody who suffered for it.
And all tracing back to one of the most powerful emotions at all, fear. We've all three described some sort of fear of this unknown on those days, the hours, and the weeks after. Like it might seem somewhat comical from 20 years history point of view, Joseph, to be like, they were coming for Minneapolis. It wasn't that day. It was not at all. Same with Los Angeles and the you watch. You talk about news travels so much fast, but what information actually travels? On the day they thought a third plane was heading towards the towers. They didn't understand, the information couldn't get out. So the fact that there might be one to come in LA, Jen, I'm with you. We sat there going, what do we do? What do we do? And that's part. So, but that fear started right from the beginning, Joseph, doing what you're doing. It turned into freedom fries real fast.
Yeah. Real fast. So I think about that a lot. Of the fallout is also who was leader when this happened, and ongoing questions of would a different administration have caught it and reacted differently. There's that history and research and debate to be had, but there's also the response, and not wanting to lose to history that Al Gore was not president based on an incredibly small number of votes and a Supreme Court decision.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And for people who I think are tempted to become disaffected and get upset with all the things that are difficult about politics and how slow and messy and insincere democracy can sometimes be, it's easy to get into this attitude that your vote doesn't matter. And boy, when you dig into history, every vote matters. A small amount of votes might have changed a lot of what we're talking about. A different voice of leadership, not even talking about the war on terror, but a different voice of leadership about how we should react to our fellow Americans after this might have made a difference.
Right.
And that comes down to voting.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to share, just because it's one of those life events that's just weird for me, about this sort of the slamming together of the way we fictionalize things versus the reality. So when the investigations were happening in the months afterward, there was the realization that some of the communication between the perpetrators was done on publicly accessed internet, particularly at Kinko's. And there was the large case against the man in Minnesota who it goes back and forth what people seem to believe about how much he was slated to be involved or not, but he was tried and convicted and all that, and he was in Minnesota. So, but none of that was super clear at the time. So there was just a floating awareness of some of the perpetrators have connections to Minnesota, and we know they used computers at Kinko's to communicate. So one of the employees at the Kinko's I worked at had reached out to the FBI and told them that, that she did remember logging a suspicious person into the computers. So the way the public computers worked at the time at Kinko's was you paid for them hourly, but an employee had to log you on. You were not supposed to give the customer the password. You were supposed to take them to the computer and say, you tell me your first and last name. I type it in, and then you look away and I type in the password.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, I didn't. I assumed it wasn't regional. I thought that was a Kinko's wide thing. Yeah.
Yes.
So I can't remember. It was months after, but I was still the assistant manager, and this extremely tired looking middle-aged man, and I'll never forget. They had like comedy mustard on his tie. Comes in and is like, what does this sad middle-aged man want? And he was like, are you the manager? And it's like, He's like, I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. May I speak to you in your office, please? I was like, but, what is this about? So this, the intersection of fantasy and reality is, lots of shows have cool, interesting FBI characters in movies, and, studying at Quantico and like here is just this it just looks like oh my god, I already had 3 kids, now my wife's gonna have triplets energy with mustard on his tie, having to know that like this is both, you gotta chase it down because there was enough connection there to be investigated. But so he told me like, hey, one of the employees asked about this, and Jen, if you've gone through it, you can probably relate. There's this sort of dark humor to it. He asked me, like, in the last several months, have you checked anyone into the computer who seemed angry or dangerous? It's like, yes, everyone. No one wants to be treated like a child and be told to put your first and last name into a computer.
Right.
Like literally one of the only happy people I ever checked into a computer was Sinbad. And even then I broke the rules because he walked in, he's like, clearly, and he asked to use the computer, and like, I got to take Sinbad to the computer, and like, I get in trouble if I don't enter a first and last name. Yeah. Like, that's a thing. Like, I might not get a raise. So I sat him down and was like, sir, what should I enter for your first name? He's like, Sinbad.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry, sir, what should I enter for your last name? He's like, it's just Sinbad. But everyone else you checked in was frustrated. And then there was also this element to it that was really uncomfortable to me because there were a lot of Muslims and people from the Midwest, and Minnesota has a thriving Somali community. Mm-hmm. So there was also this like, which of my employees is profiling, basically, because this is a large amount of the people who use our services and need them. And so there was also this element to it that was a little bit of the horror of what was happening with profiling people. Yeah. So I just, it was the only time I've been grilled by an FBI agent. And very, very weird one, but also sort of encapsulated a little bit of a lot of what we're talking about, the desperation to find, the desperation to have justice. I'm sure like whichever employee, reported it was like feeling that like, I need to respond, I need to do something. But then also that sort of like just, borderline profiling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Any other thoughts from either of you about that day or its impact?
I think it's one of the key moments in history. That seems like it's an obvious thing to say, but I that's why I think I get a little bit grumpy at some of the cynicism, and not just from quote unquote younger generations, people in my age group who I understand where they're coming from. They weren't freedom fries stupid angle, because that's a fact, but they kind of only live in that. Where I'm like, whoa, you're shutting out a lot of other things. Like, it's big, and it's big for a reason, and all angles need to be studied, experienced, and it's okay to be empathetic and sympathetic and have compassion for those who still are dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other final thoughts from you, Jennifer?
Nope. That's it.
That's plenty. So that was even longer and even heavier than I expected. I expected it to be long and heavy. So we are going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with some more lighthearted questions. Back in a moment.
Welcome back to OtherCenter. It's Cues of the Others. And yeah, you know what? This is part of the fun of doing OtherCenter and going to other areas. We can talk about favorite desserts, and we can go deep into one of the darkest days in history. I really think that's part of the appeal in a way. So, Joseph, you led us through that one. Let's go to other areas.
Yeah, so I so agree with what Ken said, and I want to be sure that since we're reflecting that it is a heavier topic, I want to thank Josh for the question.
Yeah.
You can tell from the way that you wrote this question, Josh, that you were very well aware that it was a heavier question. But we like to be able to cover everything, so we're going to jump from a heavy question to a question about beer. This comes to us from Maria McHale. Marie says, or not Maria, Marie McHale. Marie says, going back to London, I know that Joseph specifically visited several London pubs, and I hope Ken did too. While there, 1, did you try any cask ales? And if so, are you like me, now ruined for beer in the United States? And 2, did you have a favorite pub spot you visited? I'm happy to dive into this question, but I actually want to start with Jennifer. Jennifer, I don't know your relationship entirely with London or beer. So how often have you been to London, and are you a beer drinker?
I've only been to London once. I went with my parents. So in my parents don't drink alcohol. So, but I think we may have gone into a pub, because that's what I liked about, from what I could see from the outside and what I've heard, is that a British pub they're kind of not family friendly, but yeah, they're kind of family friendly in the sense that the people congregate there. You may drink, you may not. They have delicious food, and you may hang out there for hours. So I've always wanted to go back now. My husband loves beer. I'm more of a cider person if I'm gonna have it, or wine. So, but I just think it'd be fun for the experience. And it's also kind of nice to know that I could take my kids and then they could be there too.
Yeah.
Always trying to find a place that appeases both us and the kids. So yeah, but I love London. I'm an Anglophile, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
I love all things about British culture. So I want to go back someday.
Yeah, well, we got so many OtherCenter field trips to take. We can see if there's a cheesecake factory in London.
Oh no!
And go to some old pubs. But yeah, if you like cider, you're set in the UK as well. There's some amazing ciders.
Good.
Yeah. So Ken, we went to a pub together that I'm sure we'll both be chatting about. But what was your general pub and beer experience in London?
The hotel lobby bar was spectacular. I so enjoyed my time there, and so thankful to you and Sarah for making sure Grace and I got to experience a good enough portion of London beyond the convention center. But we were there for work, and so that was the focus of it. So I only went to that the pub we went to. What was that? The pub that was from the 1600s.
Well, technically, according to the sign, it was rebuilt in the 1600s, so it's even older.
Yeah.
It was the Ye Old Cheshire Cheese.
That's the one.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome!
Great old, very old pub with lots of multiple stories, lots of little rooms. So old that it feels like, well, nothing's ever going to take this down, and yet you look at the walls, they're just like this great organic warped wood, so it almost looks like, am I inside a tree? It's so ancient and organic while still being a building that stands up. The vibe is just amazing, all the dark wood, everything. So Ken, what was your experience, what did you think of Ye Old Cheshire Cheese?
Oh, absolutely loved it, and until they get it, and wanting to have wanted to step foot into a proper London pub my entire life, right? Like you, Jen, I said before the show, I used to study London, look to stare across the world towards London, because I was a Beatles obsessive, and Arthur Dent and Douglas Adams hitchhiker. Like, I just always wanted to go there. So sort of finally experienced it was truly something I cherished. And that pub was everything I'd heard about or thought about or wanted out of it, and wanted more. So one experience. Now, the one thing I'll say, Marie, like, I don't like beer of any kind. I did have a beer there. I wasn't going to be foolish and not have a pint in a pub in London, and quite enjoyed it. It was quite an experience, but it didn't ruin beer for me in the U.S. because I don't like beer in the U.S. I just don't like beer. Try to avoid it. It's never been one of my favorite things. I go straight for the hard stuff, kids. If you can call Captain and diet's hard. But no, I got it. Everything you're describing, Jen, was present in just my one brief experience there. They were so curious and polite with us. This was the home of the little man story that Joseph had experienced. Oh. But also there was just people kind of like doing their thing, just in the corner talking, because that's what they did. And I love that.
Yeah, no, it's so wonderful to be in these very old places, and as somebody who's only getting there to visit there a little bit every day, it's not there every day. It's this real special magical thing, and then they're just people in the corner complaining about work because it's a pub and people use it every day. I have a up and down relationship with beer in that I like it a little bit too much, and it gets heavy and expensive. So then I have times where I'm responsible and drink martinis instead. But no, when I was going back to the UK, I was very excited to try some more cask ales and great British beers. What Ken and I both had, because I ordered for us, was a Samuel Smith's Old Brewery Bitter. And it is just great. I'm not super an expert on all the different kinds of beers, so I'm not even going to pretend or try. I liked the flavor of it. I liked that it tasted, very different than American beers. To me, that kind of specific pub ale that I don't know all the correct terminology for, it just feels like strong and steady. And like, if your stomach's a little upset, or if you're a little tired, this'll fix you right up, kind of beer. Absolutely enjoyed it. My wife and I enjoyed it so much that we went there together with Ken and Grace, and then we went back there for dinner. And we were like, I wonder if we need to make a reservation or whatever. And there are all these different little rooms. And we found one room that looked like, I think that's a hallway to a bathroom. Like, no, it was just this tiny little nook that was all wooden and beautiful. And there was like one table in it. And you felt like a kid. If a kid was alone in that building, playing like hide and seek, they just go like hide around the wall there. It felt so bonkers cozy. And we sat down there like, is this okay? Will the server even find us here? And of course, she knows her tables, and she did. And we were like, is it okay to be back here? Is it okay to be so cozy? And she was like, of course. And had the exact same beer again. And that was great. Did not get to as many other pubs as I wanted to explore. I've been on about, having lived in London for about 3 months back in 2006. So one of the places that I really wanted to go is not a great old pub. It's a pretty new pub, I think, in general. It's not 400, 500 years old. But it was our local, as the British say. It was the pub that was closest to us. I think it's corporate owned, but it's got a great British pub name. It's the Butcher's Hook and Cleaver. Which is very, very close to Smithfield's, the old meat market, and upsettingly also very, very close to where Braveheart was, taken apart physically, drawn and quartered. There we go. Those are the words. It's even more ominous that it's it's a friendly neighborhood pub called Butcher's Hook and Cleaver. So yeah, my wife and I used to go there before we were married when we lived in London. So we made a point of going back, and they have the Fuller's Honeydew, which is just a lovely honey beer that really, really enjoyed there. And then this isn't London, but we also went to in Nottingham, Ye Old Trip to Jerusalem, which claims to be the oldest pub in the UK, and that is absolutely amazing. It's very similar in look to Ye Old Cheshire Cheese, with all the twisty little rooms and the massive oak beams that are like, how are they still supporting the wall? But it's also built into the side of a sandstone cliff that the castle's on. So we sat in a little cozy there, like, well, half of this is just cave. Absolutely amazing. And there I had a Cursed Galleon was the name of the drink. Wow. Which is a dark stout that was brewed specifically for Ye Old Trip to Jerusalem.
That's
wow.
I love all that. I gotta get more of that.
Yeah, yeah, and it is really fun when like sometimes we're all from different cultures, and sometimes there are stereotypes that come up, and they're grounded in some sort of reality. And when I run down the list of the beers in the pubs, Ye Old Cheshire Cheese, Butcher's Hook and Cleaver, Cursed Galleon, Ye Old Trip to Jerusalem.
Amazing.
Like, that is a different culture. You're not encountering those kind of names as much here in the States.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about beer in London?
I can't wait to report on the sequel trip.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking forward to it. All right, we are going to move from beer in London to another thing that I know that I like, and I'm very curious to hear Ken and Jennifer's relationship with, and that's comic books. This comes to us from Michael McCarsell. Michael says, aside from the galaxy far, far away, my other fandom is comic books. Dick Grayson / Nightwing is actually my favorite fictional character. You've both mentioned at one point or another that you're fans of comics as well. Ken is infamously behind on most of his comics. Too relatable, honestly. What are some of you guys' favorite comics, all-time favorites, recent favorites? What comics have inspired you? How were you introduced into the world of comics? Were you able to go to a local comic book store much as a kid? Thanks, and be safe. Some of these questions come in directed to Ken and myself because it's been great that Jennifer can join us more recently on the Q's question. So I definitely want to pitch to you, Jennifer. I have no idea what your relationship with comic books is. What is it?
Well, I like them, but, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about how when I was a kid, I knew about comics. Kids in my school had him. I personally didn't have him. I didn't really go into a comic book shop until I was in high school. And I remember feeling really overwhelmed and feeling intimidated, because especially during that time, like there was this idea that, girls can be into this stuff, and it felt very much like a boys club. And I already felt like I had a lot to prove with people saying that I was a Star Wars fan. I didn't need to add the comics into the mix. One battle at a time. So I think I would say it was much later, probably when I was in college, maybe. I'm not even quite sure if that's correct, but I got into Shadows of the Empire. I remember that. That was a great comic miniseries. I think it was like six issues. And so, I would kind of dabble in it here and there, but I never kept up to it where I knew, like, I wish I had. Like, I hear about people with Marvel and who have kept up over the years. My husband had a treasure trove. Oh my gosh, like trunks of Iron Man comics and all these Marvel comics. He's not even really into it anymore. But I think that that's such a neat history. And then I think more recently, in the past 10 years or so, I started taking some of the old comics that I had and would find, and I would make color copies of them at Kinko's before it was FedEx ship. And I would decoupage. So I would decoupage frames, I decoupage on shoes. I would make, decoupaged, tables, and also vases. So using the old comic books. And that was nice. We did that with my husband's old Iron Man comics books too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but we copied them that way. We didn't actually cut up his old comics.
This is a little bit of a Kinko's episode here. Yeah, because you would have had to do that in the self-serve area because we would not have been able to make those copies for you.
Oh, I know. And I remember being really scared, like they were going to find us out, because we used to try to also, Kinko's had the ability to where you could make your shirts. Remember that? Like how you guys could like print the shirt. So we would make like band t-shirts for our favorite punk bands. And sometimes they'd be like, oh, you know what? Is this your artwork? And be like, yeah. And they would do it. But for something like Star Wars, they would be like, no, you can't do that.
I would be thrilled anytime I saw somebody in self-serve doing whatever they wanted, because it's like, they're not making it my problem.
Yeah.
People get so mad when they came to the counter, like, can you make 800 copies of this Iron Man comic book? I'm like, I want to, but no, I really can't. Yeah. So I'm delighted to hear that you just use the self-serve copiers. Very good and insightful. Well, Ken, I think I'm gonna have you go next, because I need to contain myself. If we want to do an obsessed OtherCenter interview, interviewing me about something, this could be a whole episode for me. This is huge for me.
Yeah. So
where do you go?
Yeah. So my comic book relationship to begin in the 80s, in the mid 80s, and in the height of the toy books. As I said before, big fan of G.I. Joe, Transformers, and then Robotech, which told the story of the American cartoon there. That got me into my shop locally in the Arroyo Grande Village. And it was a tiny, tiny little shop, but I used to love it. It was one of my favorite things to do, to save up my, I think, 50-cent a week allowance, then go down and get like a 75-cent comic every couple of weeks, or save up. And I love that there. And through that, I was having a weird memory, because I'm a big G.I. Joe fan. And then Larry Hama, who wrote the G.I. Joe comics, he was a Vietnam vet, and he wrote a series called The Nam, which was a comic book about Vietnam. Now, that's probably not what you'd want, kid. I don't know. It was a weird thing, like, because I was reading on some researchers episode, there was some criticism of the book. It was an award-winning book, but there was some, like, I don't know if Vietnam should be the topic of a comic book. I might trivialize it. And it kind of did for me as a kid. It turned it into another G.I. Joe adventure for me. However, the comic book is serious. It's not played for adventure or thrills. It's I remember it being pretty real. So I think in the end, I'd side on the, hey, not a bad idea, especially where comics always were, but where comics go, like where they're treated more as serious versus I was a kid in a shop, right? So I think it's a good thing. But yeah, that's my relationship started. But then baseball cards and all those kind of things went in, and then I re-upped about 2013. I had never touched one, and I never was a superhero comic fan, and didn't pick one up. Didn't follow any of that stuff, but then started working with the schmoes and YouTube stuff, and then I was producing Tiffany Smith's weekly comic book show, Stacked. We'd go over to her house. She'd review 3 or 4 comics, and I would badly shoot it and edit it, because I was still learning all that stuff. But then I was kind of like, this all sounds great. I want to experience this. And even though I was always a nerd, grew up a nerd, and whatever that meant in the 80s and whatever it means now, I had kind of moved out of that and thought maybe I shouldn't. Can I get comics? This weird thing that I wasn't allowed to do it. And I was, friends with Matt Key, who was a comic nut. And so, yeah, she was like, yeah, you should go get some comics. And then I did go with my friend Joe Ruggiero to his comic shop, which is my shop now, Earth 2 in Sherman Oaks. Then I went to Earth 2 Northridge till they closed. But then I went with Matt Key one time to a place in Pasadena, and I just bought like $100 worth of comics. And was like, this is heaven. This is heaven. And yes, some large portion of the Space Saga stuff there that we like. But we'll list some of my other favorites. But that kind of re-upped, and now it's been 10 years of getting comics all the time, whether I read them or not. I still love having them.
Are you I know we've mentioned you've read some Bond comics. Yeah. Did you plunge into this superhero world at all?
The only ones I read were the Matt Fraction run on Hawkeye, where there was just something about it that pulled me in, and I heard some good things about it, and I think I was trying. And I think even Matt Key kind of had said, hey, this is, if this is a good spot, it might be good for you to enter into the Marvel world through this. And so I still have it.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I really love it. And I did watch that series because of it. So yeah, but no, I never did. I still never did. I went other directions outside of the Star Wars stuff too.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is one of the powers of comic books is superheroes have dominated them, but they didn't always dominate them. And there's so many great indie comics, and it's an art form. A narrative story with sequential art is one of the art forms allegedly invented in America, and it is an art form onto itself, as well as this whole superhero thing. So I think it's great that you explore lots of different things.
It's fun.
Yeah, so I mean, a fun part of OtherCenter, I think, has been getting to know a little bit about more about one another, and then also sometimes getting to know a surprise thing about one of our other readers. Comic books and superhero comic books were a big thing for me, but particularly Michael McCarcel, Dick Grayson, Nightwing, just huge for me. So there's on the site formerly known as Twitter, there is a great account called the Spinner Rack, and they mostly do 70s and 80s. They do some 90s. On specific days, they will just share like 4 comics that came out that day. And that's always great. Fun, because then people respond which ones they got and which ones, I picked up these 2, but not these other 2 for this reason. So just a fun memory lane kind of thing. But a couple times the Spinner Rack has posted the day that my grandpa must have gone to Walgreens. Because, when I was young, comic books were still just kind of, they were on racks everywhere. At 7-Eleven. And I think it's just some of my grandpa, who poor man, had a lot of hard problems because of World War II, struggled. And that was one of the nice grandpa things he did a couple of times. Just here's 6 comic books, and blew my mind and treasured those. And eventually, at one point, I got one random issue of the new Teen Titans by Marv Wolfman and the recently departed phenomenal artist George Perez. And I had grown up an absolute Robin the Boy Wonder guy. I'd seen the Batman 66 show in reruns. I've joked before, but it's true. My brother and I divided fictional characters like we were going through a divorce. One of us got one. He had Spock and I had Kirk. He was Han, I was Solo, on and on and on. And he was Batman, and I was Robin. And I think I really related to this idea of, a kid could be a superhero too. And like Robin's so not just a kid, he's also kind of the younger brother, more often the Batman's son. But from my perspective, like, oh, well, my older brother's Batman, but the younger guy can be a hero too. Adored Robin. I cried when I had to settle for Superman underoos and couldn't get Robin underoos. And then I got this comic where it's like, oh, Robin's getting to be an older teen, and he's leading a whole team of other superheroes. And to Marv Wolfman and George Perez's credits, the heroes were still, all of them were incredibly fit, but they were drawn with different body types. Even the women were all attractive, but with different body types. So there was like this diversity in it. And Marv Wolfman had brought from Marvel a little bit more of the fun to watch them fight and have adventures, but it's also a soap opera. So got hooked as a kid of, well, Starfire wants to date Robin, but he's kind of dragging his feet for some reason. He's like, you fool, Robin. So I got hooked into that, and I had this moment of like, could I do it? Could I collect a comic book? Because Grandpa just used to bring some, but could I find out every issue what happens next? And at the time, I lived in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and there weren't any comic book stores. It was just, I had to go to like 7-Eleven or the grocery store and hope I didn't miss one. So huge for me. One of my favorite comic book issues, and I wanted to bring this up specifically because Michael talked about loving the character. There's an incredibly famous in comic book circles story in the new Teen Titans. In some ways, that comic book run, which is hugely influential, was built leading up to this story called the Judas Contract, where one of the characters, one of the Titans, betrays the other Titans. And I was so desperate to not miss an issue of this because I'd missed one recently. 7-Eleven just didn't have it. And I will always remember Tales of the Teen Titans number 44. It is the third part of the Judas Contract, and it is entitled "There Shall Come a Titan," and it is Nightwing's first appearance. And he had been like, because it's so soap opera. Earlier in the run, Robin had been like, Robin is kind of the shadow of Batman. I'm always going to be and Robin, and is going to be like the. And I need to grow up. I need to be my own person. So he just didn't have a costume. He didn't have a name. And you're left hanging, going like, who's he going to be? Who's he going to be? And it really is this. The Titans are at their lowest ever, and he decides, I have to decide a new identity. I have to be my own person. But I don't want to reject my past, so I want it to evoke Batman. I'm going to be Nightwing. And I remember sitting in my backyard in St. Cloud and just feeling like this. I could be Nightwing. This is what happens to Robins. Yeah. They grow up and they become their own person and they have their own identity. That's just I've always been a fan of Nightwing. And then we moved to Minneapolis, and there were actual comic book stores, and we had a deal where if we went to church on Sunday morning, we'd go to the comic book store afterwards. That was a great deal that worked out. And I was voracious in the 80s, and it was the late 80s in particular. It was a good time with, Watchmen and Dark Knight and New Mutants and big times in comic books. And around the early 90s, they started doing a lot of the crossovers. The success of the Batman film drove up prices, and people really started to look at everything as a collector's thing, and the companies started to pump out, trying to make things collectible when the collectible just happens organically. It's a character appears, the first time. And it got real expensive, and it got, for me, like, I wanted to be able to just collect one or two comics. And I think it got to the way that both of you started to encounter of, it's kind of hard, in my opinion, to this day to just be like, I want to follow this one comic. Yeah. And that's when I kind of tapped out, and I've checked in over the years. It's been really nice to read some of the Galactic Tales. But to wrap up my long thing, apologies for the long memory. Just recently I was in Portland for that film festival, and I went to this comic book store, and they've rebooted the Titans 1,800 times since my beloved Titans. And I realized that they had just started a new run of Titans comics. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try. I'm going to try to collect again. So I bought the first 2 issues of this new Titans run. I'm going to try to keep up.
Oh, that's great.
Good for you. I admire that. I'd love to do that. Yeah.
I'm going to try to spend too much money on another collectible again. I think I can do it. I really think I can do it. Do either of you have favorite superheroes at this point, the way the Michael and I are on about Nightwing?
I don't. I've always sort of enjoyed Batman, but that was years ago. I haven't taken the sweep. I do want to eventually watch some of the motion pictures out there that go back into him.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we can talk off air. I'll give you some opinions. Yeah. Jennifer, did you ever relate to a specific superhero?
I mean, I loved Wonder Woman but that was from the TV series. Actually, I was trying to get my daughter into comics because she really likes it, and it's a great way to have her interested in reading. And there was a Princess Diana comic book. She really liked it, but I think that there was only 1 or 2 that were at her level, and so that was kind of a bummer. And then there was another. Was it a comic book? I don't know, but I've been trying to find things for her, and they don't come out fast enough, or there's not enough of them. I'm like, please, she's really enjoying this, and I'm enjoying seeing that she's enjoying it. So, but yeah, she does like Wonder Woman. I will say that.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I think for anybody interested, if you're interested in the art form, it's real fun, especially if you go to a place that puts some of the non-DC and Marvel comics up front, to just go in and explore the vast number of different kinds of stories there are. And I think the popularity of graphic novels where things are collected and you can more easily just pick up a short run of something and just try it out. I'm kind of down on it because I'm still bitter from the early 90s. But I think comics are more accessible than they feel like. You can just grab any graphic novel and give it a try. And if you want to keep collecting from there, you certainly can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it's Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld. It's actually, put out by DC Comics. She loves it. It's really, really good. Highly recommend it if you want to get your young kids into comics.
There you go. Check out Amethyst and the Judas Contract from 1983. That is it for the cues. Want to take us home, Ken?
Yeah, I was going to suggest Saga, which is great, but also Sex Criminal.
Oh, yeah.
Great, but maybe not for kids. And Velvet. Joe, you might like Velvet. I'll tell you about that one off air too. James Bondian like a story. Nice. Hey, we went to a lot of places today. Thanks for support. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing your opinions with us if you need to. We'll keep on going here, doing what we're doing. You can find us on Twitter at ForceCenter Pod. We're on Threads as well. Facebook page is ForceCenter Podcast. Instagram and YouTube podcasts available in a lot of spots. Acast, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and more. Just search. You'll find us. tpublic.com/user/ForceCenter for merch. Patreon.com/ForceCenter to support us directly. You can find me at Ken Napzok or my website, kennapzok.com. Got some exciting announcements on things I'm releasing soon, too, as well as some travel stand-up dates as well. Jen, where can they find and follow you?
You can find and follow me on TikTok at Jennifer Landa 1138, YouTube, Instagram at Jennifer Landa. And if you're interested, I have a lot of things about all things retro from the 80s and 90s.
Joseph, take us home. Where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on all the social media at Joseph Scrimshaw, in particular, Blue Sky and Instagram. I'm trying to spend a little bit more time on those sites. Maybe I will post a picture of the copy that I still have with me in this home of There Shall Come a Titan, Nightwing's first appearance. If you're interested in following my filmmaking adventures, the short horror film I made with a bunch of great people, The Nightmare Adorable, is beginning its festival run. Got a lot of festivals coming up in the next month or so. There's information on all of those showings on my website, the front page at josephscrimshaw.com. That is it.
That is it. We'll see you next time, friends, here on OtherCenter.